In February 2016, a quiet Welsh village woke up to something no one could explain. A black, pyramid-shaped object hovered over the fields. Then came the roar of military jets, and silence. Now, whistleblowers from inside the Pentagon claim they know why, and what they describe is far more terrifying than anything in the report's Chapter 1. The night, the sky changed. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a quiet village in Wales. Rolling hills, a few farms, narrow roads, and a night sky that usually looks the same every single day of the year. That is For most people, this is the kind of place where nothing strange ever happens, until February of 2016. That was when the sky above Pentyrch stopped being ordinary. For 3 days before the night it all happened, the people living there noticed something odd. There were planes circling over the village, not once or twice, but over and over. These were not the usual commercial flights. They were military planes. They were loud, and they flew in strange patterns. People talked about it in pubs and in their homes. They asked one another why the planes kept coming back. No one could explain it. The local news did not report anything about a military exercise. There were no warnings. It was strange, but nobody could have guessed what was coming next. On the night of February 26, 2016, just after 2:30 in the morning, something appeared in the sky. At first, it was lights. People woke up because their dogs were barking. Some saw flashes of green and red outside their windows. It looked like something moving across the sky, not like stars or normal planes. Then came a deep, low sound, like an engine but heavier. It was not a sound you hear from a car or a helicopter. It was something that seemed to come from everywhere at once. And then they saw it. Hanging above the fields, just on the edge of the village, was a shape so dark that it looked like it swallowed the stars around it. People later described it as a giant black pyramid. No lights on it, no markings. It was silent and still. The size of it shocked everyone. It was not small like a drone. It was massive, larger than a building, just floating there in the night sky. What made it worse was the silence. Everything in the village went quiet. Even the dogs, which had been barking non-stop, stopped all at once. It felt like the entire countryside held its breath. Those who were awake described it as a feeling in the air, like static before a thunderstorm, except there was no thunder, no wind, no clouds, just that black shape in a sky that seemed to stand still. Only a few seconds passed before the quiet was broken. Jets screamed overhead. The military response was fast and powerful. Within moments, the village that was silent turned into a war zone in the sky. Residents reported hearing multiple planes, the sound of helicopters, and the kind of engines that make your windows shake. This was not an accident. It was clear that the military knew exactly where to go and what to chase. Some of the villagers said it looked as if the aircraft had been waiting for this moment. From that point on, the night became chaos. People saw bright flares in the sky. They heard loud bangs, like small explosions. Some saw streams of light shooting upward, as if the planes were firing at something. The pyramid did not move like a normal aircraft. It made no sound, and it did not try to run. It simply hovered there as the chaos surrounded it. Then, something strange happened. A bright flash of light lit up the sky. Several witnesses described a moment where the pyramid seemed to blink or shimmer, almost like it was becoming invisible. And just as fast as it appeared, it was gone. Not gone like flying away. Gone like it was never there. The lights from the military jets were still there. The helicopter still circled, but the object itself was no longer visible. What followed was even more confusing. After that flash of light, the sky seemed different. Some villagers said that for a few seconds they could not hear anything. The noise stopped. Then, as if someone turned a switch back on, the roar of the engines returned, louder than ever. The jets stayed in the sky for hours. The helicopters stayed low, circling the fields, and the villagers stayed awake, wondering what had just happened. When the sun came up, things became even more strange. The quiet little fields on the edge of Pentyrch were now closed off. Soldiers were everywhere. Trucks and military vehicles blocked the roads. People who tried to get close were turned away. They were told to leave the area. Some say they saw soldiers carrying strange equipment. Others say they saw something being loaded onto a large transport helicopter. No one could get close enough to see what it was. Later that day, an official statement was given. It was just a routine military exercise. Nothing unusual had happened. There was nothing to worry about. For most people, that explanation was enough. But for the people who saw the lights, who saw the Black Pyramid, and who heard the strange noises, that answer did not make sense. In the days that followed, people in Pentyrch talked to each other in whispers. They compared what they saw. Almost all of them told the same story. The pyramid, the sudden silence, the quick response of the military, and the feeling that they had just watched something no one was supposed to see. This night would become known as the Pentyrch incident. It is one of the most talked about UFO events in the United Kingdom, not because of a blurry photo or a rumor, but because a whole village saw the same thing with their own eyes. What makes this case stand out is how fast the military acted. They were there within seconds, as if they were waiting. That raises a question that has not been answered to this day. Did they already know something was coming that night? As you listen to these events, remember that this is only the beginning. Over the next few years, people who worked inside secret government programs began to speak out. They say that what happened in Pentyrch was not a drill, not a training exercise, but a confrontation. They claim that what people saw that night was real, and that the truth about it has been locked away. In the next chapter, we will look at what the witnesses said the next morning, what the authorities did, and how this quiet Welsh village became the center of a story that refuses to go away. Chapter 2. Witnesses versus Authorities. When the sun came up over Pentyrch on the morning of February 26, 2016, the night before, already felt like a dream to some. But for those who stayed awake through the chaos, it was no dream. The strange lights, the pyramid-shaped object, and the sound of jets had been very real. Now they wanted answers. People walked to the fields where the object had been seen. What they found was a wall of soldiers. The area was closed off. Roads that had always been open were blocked by military trucks. Men in uniform were standing shoulder to shoulder, telling anyone who came near to leave immediately. There was no explanation given. No one from the village had ever seen such a presence before. Some villagers tried to take photos with their phones. They were told to put the phones away. A few were even threatened with being removed by force if they did not leave. It was clear that something serious had taken place, and yet no one in authority would explain what. Back in the village, people began talking to each other. Almost everyone had the same story. They had been woken up by their dogs barking. They had seen flashes of light outside their windows. They had heard loud engines, louder than any normal plane. And some, those who had been looking at the sky at the right moment, had seen the dark, massive pyramid. Many of these witnesses called the local police that night. The phone lines lit up with reports of low-flying aircraft, strange lights, and loud noises. The people wanted to know if something had crashed or if there was an emergency. They wanted someone to tell them that everything was under control. But according to those who made those calls, the response was always vague. Officers on the phone said they did not know what was happening. They told people to stay inside. Some were told that there was nothing to worry about. Others were told that no information could be given. It was frustrating, and it only made people more curious about what was going on above their homes. Then there were the explosions. Several people reported hearing what sounded like small bursts, like weapons being fired. Others described seeing sparks or flares in the air. These sounds were not random. They were followed by the sound of helicopters and jets circling as if in combat. One witness described seeing a flash of bright blue light coming from the fields. He said it was like a camera flash, but so strong that it lit up the sky for a moment. After that, he said, the Black Pyramid seemed to fade, like a shadow disappearing. When the noise finally started to die down around dawn, everyone expected to see a huge story on the news. They thought that reporters and helicopters would be everywhere. Something so big, so strange, had to be covered, right? But nothing happened. The local news stations reported nothing unusual. The only official statement that came out later in the day said that the military had been conducting a routine exercise. They said there was no danger. They said there were no crashes, no unidentified aircraft. Everything that people had seen and heard that night was, according to the statement, just training. This explanation made no sense to the people who had been there. Why would a training exercise be kept secret from the very village it took place over? Why were the fields blocked off? Why did the authorities act like something had been recovered? And why, most of all, did no one ever mention the massive Black Pyramid? Over the next few days, word of the strange event began to spread outside Pentyrch. UFO investigators arrived. Some of them went door to door, asking people what they had seen. What they heard was always the same. Strange lights, loud military activity, a large dark object, and a sudden, strange silence that lasted for a few seconds. One of the most detailed accounts came from a woman who lived on the edge of the village. She said she had been looking out of a window because her dogs would not stop barking. She saw red and green lights moving slowly across the sky. At first, she thought it might be a helicopter, but then she saw the shape, a huge, dark triangle or pyramid with sharp edges and no sound. It hovered, and then, just as she started to call for her husband, jets appeared out of nowhere. The sky filled with noise, lights, and flares. She described it as looking like a battle. She remembered calling the police and being told only that the military was handling it. No one could tell her what the object was. Others in the village described the same eerie pause in sound that night, as if someone pressed a mute button on the world. After the flash of light, everything was silent for a moment, and then the noise returned. Despite all of these reports, the official story did not change. The Ministry of Defense repeated that it was a training exercise. No other explanation was ever given, and that silence, that lack of answers, made people even more certain that something important had happened. Over the weeks that followed, investigators found small but strange details. Some claimed that there were patches of grass in the fields that looked burned. Others said they saw marks on the ground, as if something heavy had been placed there and then removed. There were even rumors that something large had been loaded into a military transport helicopter before sunrise. For the villagers, the message was clear. Whatever had happened that night was something the authorities did not want them to know about. Whether it was a secret military project, a crash, or something else, they were being told to forget about it. But the people of Pentyrch did not forget, and neither did the UFO. 4 years after, this case would be studied, debated, and revisited. Many came to believe that what happened that night was not just an unexplained object. They believed it was a confrontation. They believed the military had been sent to intercept something they could not control. That is why, years later, when former military and intelligence officers began to speak publicly as Whistleblowers, one of the first incidents they mentioned was Pentyrch. For them, it was proof that the story of UFOs and military encounters is much bigger than the public has been told. In the next chapter, we will hear what these whistleblowers had to say. For the first time, people inside the Pentagon began to tell their side of the story, and what they revealed made the villagers' stories even more chilling. Chapter 3. The whistleblowers stepped forward 4 years after that, February night in 2016. The people of Pentyrch were left with only their own memories. They had no answers from the authorities. The official explanation never changed. It had been a training exercise, but for those who were there, that answer never felt right. And then, years later, the silence started to break. In 2023, a series of hearings and interviews began to appear in the news. These were not from UFO hunters or conspiracy theorists. These were from people who had worked inside the United States government. Military pilots, intelligence officers, and program managers came forward and started talking about things they had never spoken about before. They became whistleblowers, and among the cases they mentioned was the incident in Pentyrch. One of the first whistleblowers was a former intelligence officer who had spent years working on classified programs. In an interview, he spoke carefully, choosing his words, but what he said was clear. That night in Wales was not a drill, he said. The operation was a recovery. Something entered the airspace. It was not one of ours, and what happened after was an attempt to contain it. When asked if he was certain the object was not a human aircraft, he answered without hesitation, "I have seen technology from every country. I know what belongs to us. That was not ours." He went on to describe how quickly the British military responded. According to him, This kind of response only happens when an object is tracked 4 hours before it arrives. He claimed that radar systems detected something approaching, something large, and that forces were in place waiting to intercept. This detail matched exactly what the villagers had noticed. Planes in the sky for 3 days before the event. Another whistleblower, a retired pilot, described an object that had the ability to disable radar and communications. He said, "When these things show up, you lose your picture. Your radar goes blank. It is like the sky becomes empty. That is why civilians sometimes see them and the official systems do not show anything. They can turn everything off." This was an important detail because villagers had reported that in the middle of the chaos, for a short time, everything became silent. That could be the moment, he said, when the object's technology disrupted the systems around it. In a separate interview, a contractor who had worked on recovery operations said that during that night, a team collected materials from the ground in Pentyrch. He did not say what those materials were, but he said they were not ordinary. He said that the public would be shocked if they knew what had been taken away before sunrise. These accounts began to spread across news outlets and podcasts. Suddenly, Pentyrch was back in the headlines. This time, it was not just a local mystery. It was being tied to a larger pattern of encounters between the military and objects that no one could identify. What made these testimonies stand out was how consistent they were with what the villagers had described. The whistleblowers did not know the witnesses personally, yet their details matched. The lights, the strange silence, the quick response, and something being taken away under heavy guard. Some of these insiders went even further. They claimed that the object in Pentyrch was a type of craft that had been seen before. They called it a pyramid-class craft. It was not the first time a black, pyramid-shaped object had been seen in the sky. There were reports of similar shapes over the ocean and even near American naval ships. And in some cases, those objects were also chased, surrounded, and eventually disappeared. One of the most startling claims came from a man who said he had seen classified photos of the Pentyrch incident. He described the object as huge, silent, and completely black, with sharp edges. It seemed to absorb light. The helicopters and planes circled it, but nothing they did could make it move. He also said that after the bright flash, something came down into the field, almost like a controlled landing, and that is when the recovery operation began. The whistleblowers admitted they could not explain where these objects come from. Some of them used the term non-human technology. Others said they believed the objects were probes or vehicles from somewhere else. No one could say for sure. What they agreed on was this: the incident in Pentyrch was not a drill. For many people, hearing this from insiders was a turning point. It meant that what had been dismissed as a strange story from a small village was now being taken seriously at the highest levels. The case had moved from rumor to evidence. It also raised bigger questions. If governments have been chasing these objects for years, how much do they know? Why are these encounters kept secret? And what happened to the materials that were collected in that field in 2016? In the months after the whistleblowers came forward, researchers began connecting dots. They noticed that after the Pentyrch event, the airspace over that part of Wales was restricted more often. They also noticed that similar incidents were happening in other parts of the world, often followed by the same official explanation: a training exercise. The villagers, who had spent years feeling ignored, finally felt that they were not alone. People believed them. The testimony of these whistleblowers gave new weight to their stories. It also gave them a new question to think about. What exactly had been hovering over their fields that night? Even though the government still has not released any official confirmation, the statements from these insiders have made one thing clear. Something extraordinary happened in Pentyrch, something that those involved still do not want the world to fully understand. In the next chapter, we'll look at the evidence that remains. Photos, radar data, and witness reports that, when combined with these new testimonies, paint a picture of a night that should never have been forgotten. Chapter 4. Evidence that shouldn't exist when people talk about the Pentyrch incident. One question always comes up. Is there any real evidence? Not just memories, not just stories, but something you can see, or measure, or study. After the whistleblowers came forward, researchers started to look again at the pieces of information that survived from that night, and what they found was surprising. There are photographs, radar gaps, and small details on the ground that together form a strange pattern. Let's start with the photos. On the night of February 26, a few villagers managed to capture images on their phones before the military blocked everything off. Most of these pictures show bright-colored lights, red, green, and blue, moving in strange patterns across the dark sky. In one photo, you can see what looks like a huge shadow in the background, a shape blocking out the stars. It is not clear, it is not sharp, but it looks like something massive was sitting there, with lights around it. Skeptics argue that these lights could be flares or helicopters, and in some photos, that could be true. But there are also images where the lights do not line up with any aircraft flight path. They appear in strange positions, sometimes far apart from the obvious planes. One picture in particular, taken just minutes before the big flash of light, shows a group of small bright dots on one side of the sky and a much larger, darker shape on the other. Many who have studied this image believe it was the moment the object was surrounded. The second type of evidence came later from radar records. Civilian radar data for that area showed something very unusual. For a few minutes, just before 3 a.m., everything went blank. Normally, radar shows constant information about commercial aircraft, private planes, and sometimes even weather balloons. But in that window of time, the data disappeared. It was as if the airspace over Pentyrch had been wiped clean. After those few minutes, the data returned, showing a cluster of military aircraft. This matches almost exactly what a retired pilot whistleblower described, that some objects can shut down radar and make the sky look empty. Investigators also looked at reports from people living a little further away. In nearby villages, some people said they saw something bright in the distance that night, like a sudden burst of white-blue light. One farmer said his cows became restless at exactly the same time. The animals tried to break through their fence. He said he had never seen them so frightened. When researchers were finally able to visit the fields days later, they noticed odd marks on the ground. In some areas, the grass was flattened in perfect circles, as if something very heavy had been placed there. In other spots, the grass was burned, leaving dark patches. There was no sign of farm equipment that could explain it. The military had already been there and removed whatever they were looking for. The villagers say that on the morning after the event, a large transport helicopter landed in one of these fields. It stayed for several minutes while soldiers loaded something large onto it. Witnesses couldn't see what it was because of the distance, but they could see the effort. Trucks drove up, soldiers gathered around, and when the helicopter finally lifted off, it seemed to struggle with the weight. There is also an audio recording that some people find chilling. It was made by a local who, after hearing the first jets, decided to use a small handheld recorder from his window. The recording starts with the sound of distant engines. Then the noise grows louder, as if multiple jets are flying overhead. And then suddenly everything goes quiet, dead silent for almost 6 seconds. After that, there is a sharp bang, like a flash, and the noise of the engines rushes back in, louder than before. This exact description matches dozens of eyewitness accounts. People who have analyzed the audio say it does not sound like normal training. They say the drop in sound is too sudden, too complete. It's like something shut off all background noise for those seconds. Some skeptics argue that all these pieces of evidence could be explained. They say the marks in the field could come from farming equipment, the lights could be from military flares, and the radar gap could be a technical error. These are possible explanations, but when you put all the pieces together and the consistent stories from dozens of people, the result does not look like a simple training exercise. Another important clue comes from comparisons. Researchers who study UFO cases noticed that the Pentyrch incident shares details with other events. In 2008, near Stephenville, Texas, dozens of people saw a huge silent object, followed by military jets. Radar records for that night also showed gaps. In 2019, U.S. Navy ships near California reported pyramid-shaped objects hovering above them. Those objects were tracked 4 days before they vanished. And in both those cases, as in Pentyrch, no official explanation was ever given beyond training. This pattern makes many people believe that Pentyrch was not an isolated event. It may be part of something much bigger. Today, if you visit Pentyrch, the fields look normal again. There are no signs of what happened. The soldiers are long gone. There are no fences or warning signs. But if you talk to the people who were there that night, they will tell you that the sky has never felt the same since. One local man, who's lived there his whole life, says he no longer looks at the stars in the same way. That night showed me that we are not the only ones up there, he says. And whatever that thing was, it was not afraid of us. We were the ones afraid of it. The evidence from Pentyrch may never be enough for some. There is no clear photograph of the Black Pyramid. There is no official document that has been made public. But what remains, those fragments of light, those strange radar records, and the marks in the fields continue to challenge the official explanation. And now, with the words of the whistleblowers added to this evidence, a new question has started to form. If the object was real, what exactly was it doing there? In the next chapter, we will explore the theories. Was Pentyrch the scene of a cover-up? Or was it something even more important? Was this the first open encounter with something from beyond? And if so, why has the truth been hidden for so long? Chapter 5. The Cover-Up, or the First Contact. What really happened in Pentyrch on that February night? After everything we have gone through, the witnesses, the soldiers, the whistleblowers, and the strange evidence, there are still only two possible answers. Either the government is covering up something, or that night was our first real contact with something far beyond us. Let's take the first possibility, a cover-up. For decades, people have claimed that governments hide the truth about unidentified objects. They say that the reason is simple: control. If an object appears that no military can catch or explain, it shows the public that we are not in control of our own skies. It creates fear. It raises questions that no one has answers for. The easiest way to manage that fear is to say nothing and call everything a drill. The Pentyrch case looks exactly like this. The speed of the military response, the silence from the authorities, the sudden roadblocks, the recovery teams, the training exercise story. Even years later, no documents, no reports, nothing has been released. If this was just a drill, why keep it secret? Why block the area from the very people who live there? Why remove something in the middle of the night? This is why so many believe that Pentyrch was a cover-up of a crash, a close approach, or an encounter that went wrong. But there is another possibility, one that is even more unsettling. What if the object in the sky that night was not trying to hide? What if it wanted to be seen? What if that night was the first time that something not from here decided to show itself in a way that no one could ignore? The pyramid shape, the lights, the sudden silence, these details are unlike anything known. And the way it stayed still, even as jets surrounded it, does not sound like an accident. It looked like confidence, almost like a test, a way of saying, "We are here, we do not fear you." The whistleblowers themselves have said that these objects have been tracked before. They appear, they move in ways no human technology can match, and then they vanish. Many of these insiders now admit that the Pentagon and other governments do not understand what these objects are. They cannot stop them, and that may be why these events are kept so quiet. Could Pentyrch have been a planned meeting? Something that those involved expected to happen? Remember, the jets were already in the air before the pyramid arrived. This was not a reaction. It was a waiting game. Someone knew something was coming. There is another strange detail worth thinking about. After the bright flash, after the silence, the object did not escape. It did not fight back. It simply disappeared. Was it taken? Or did it leave on its own terms? That is a question that no one has been able to answer. Even the people who live there, who saw everything with their own eyes, have been left with more questions than answers. And that, perhaps, is the scariest part. Because once you know that the official story is not true, once you realize that something impossible was floating above your home, you start to wonder what else you do not know. The Pentyrch incident has never been explained, and maybe it never will be. What we do know is that it left behind a chain of evidence that cannot be ignored. Dozens of witnesses, radar anomalies, physical marks on the ground, and now, years later, the testimony of whistleblowers who were inside the programs that tracked these objects. For some, all of this points to one conclusion: that February night was a moment in history when our world brushed against something from somewhere else. For others, it is a reminder that there are secrets kept from the public, and that even in a quiet village, you can find yourself standing under a sky that is not as empty as you once thought. When you look up at the stars tonight, Think about this. If the people of Pentyrch were right, then something out there knows who we are, and it might already have been here. This story has no neat ending, no official answers, just questions that continue to echo through the quiet hills of Wales. What did the villagers see? What was taken away before dawn? And why are those who know the most about it still silent? Perhaps one day the files will be opened, and the truth will finally come out. Until then, the Pentyrch incident remains one of the clearest warnings that the skies above us are not as simple as they seem. If you've been following this story, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think this was a cover-up, or do you believe it was a moment of contact with something we still don't understand? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy deep investigations like this one, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps more people discover these stories that most have never heard before.